Welcome, friends. Pull up a chair. The night is long, and the shadows outside are growing restless. If you're here, it means you're looking for a story that lingers long after you close your eyes. You're in the right place. Before we step into the dark, I want to ask you a small favor. We are on a journey to reach our first 1,000 subscribers as quickly as possible, building a community of those who appreciate the macabre. If you enjoy the chill down your spine, please hit that subscribe button. It costs nothing, but means everything. Take a second to like this video and share it with a friend who loves a good scare. And tell me, in the comments below, where in the world are you watching from right now? Have you ever experienced something out there? Something strange, unexplained, something that made your blood run cold? Share it with us. The dark is always less lonely when we share our fears. Now, take a deep breath, settle in. Let me tell you about the tape. The package arrived on a Thursday. Elias Thorne always hated Thursdays. They were the dead zone of the week. Too late to start something new, too early for the weekend. Elias was an archivist. He spent his days in the basement of the State Historical Society, digitizing old audio reels, cataloging the forgotten voices of the dead. He was used to the mundane, but the package waiting on his desk wasn't mundane. It was a small, square cardboard box wrapped in heavy brown paper. No return address. The postage stamps were obsolete, designs that hadn't been printed since the late 1980s. When Elias cut the tape, the smell hit him first. It smelled like damp earth, copper, and old pine, like a grave dug in a forest. Inside was a single heavy reel-to-reel audio tape. Wrapped around the spool was a note written in frantic, jagged handwriting. The pen had pressed so hard it tore the paper. It read, "They didn't freeze. The trees wouldn't let them." Elias, being a man of routine and logic, didn't panic. He was intrigued. He loaded the tape onto his Studer A80 machine, put on his heavy studio headphones, and pressed play. At first, there was only the hiss of degraded magnetic tape. Then, wind, a howling, bitter wind. It was followed by the sound of a man speaking. His voice was trembling, tight with an exhaustion that went straight to the bone. November 12th, 1989. This is Father Miller, Blackwood Ridge Logging Camp. The snow has blocked the pass. We are 52 souls up here. But Mr. Silas says we don't need to worry about the cold. He says the woods are hungry, but they are fair. Then the audio changed. The wind stopped. For a solid 3 minutes, Elias listened to a sound that made his stomach drop. It wasn't static. It was a chorus of voices, men, women, and children. But they weren't crying for help. They were humming, a low, discordant, buzzing hum that sounded less like humans and more like a hive of insects vibrating in unison. And beneath the humming, a sickening, wet, crunching sound, like thick branches breaking or bones snapping under immense pressure. Elias stopped the tape. His hands were shaking. He pulled off his headphones, the silence of his office suddenly suffocating. He spent the next 48 hours doing what he did best, hunting for the truth. Blackwood Ridge wasn't on any modern map of the Pacific Northwest. It took Elias digging through archived logging permits from the 1980s to find it. It was a private settlement established by a lumber company that went bankrupt in 1990. According to the official state records, the camp was abandoned before the heavy winter of '89 due to financial collapse. Everyone simply packed up and went home. No missing persons, no tragedies. But Elias knew how to read between the lines. He found a single police report from a neighboring county in early 1990. A hunter had found a truck abandoned on the logging road leading to Blackwood Ridge. Inside the truck were the frozen remains of a dog and a diary belonging to Clara. The last entry simply read, "Silas made a deal. The sap is blood. We stay." Elias didn't call the police. The police wouldn't care about a 30-year-old tape and a ghost town that supposedly didn't exist. He packed a bag. He packed his field recorder. He packed a heavy flashlight and a crowbar. He was going to find Blackwood Ridge. The drive took him deep into the Cascade Mountains. By the time his GPS lost signal, the paved road had given way to cracked, neglected asphalt, and finally to overgrown gravel. The trees up here were ancient, massive, towering Douglas firs that blotted out the pale palm autumn sun. The deeper he drove, the thicker the fog became. It wasn't normal fog. It was heavy, clinging to his windshield like oily wool. When he finally found the wooden archway overgrown with thorny vines, he stopped the car. The wood was carved with deep, frantic scratches, reading Blackwood Ridge. Elias stepped out into the biting cold. The silence of the forest was absolute. No birds, no rustling leaves. But as he walked past the archway and caught his first glimpse of the rotting wooden cabins emerging from the mist, he noticed the trees. The trunks of the pines surrounding the cabins were wrong. They were swollen, bulging in unnatural, lumpy shapes. Elias walked up to the nearest tree, shining his flashlight against the bark. He expected to see knots in the wood. Instead, staring back at him from the center of the dark pine trunk, perfectly encased in hardened amber-like sap, was a human eye. Elias stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. It hit the frozen earth with a dull thud, the beam rolling wildly across the forest floor before settling on the base of the tree. He hadn't imagined it. It wasn't a trick of the fog or his exhausted mind. Encased in the thick, hardened sap of the Douglas fir was a human eye. And the worst part, the horrific, paralyzing part, the pupil was dilated. The sap surrounding it wasn't the cloudy yellow of ancient amber. It was dark, viscous, and deep within the trunk, Elias could swear he saw the faint, shadowy outline of a rib cage woven into the wood. Elias couldn't breathe. His chest tightened as the reality of the situation crashed over him. He picked up his flashlight with trembling fingers and forced himself to look away from the tree. He had to keep moving. He had to know what happened here. He walked past the tree line and into the heart of Blackwood Ridge. There were perhaps 30 cabins in total, arranged in a tight semicircle. They were rotting, the roofs sagging under the weight of decades of dead pine needles. But there was something deeply unnatural about them. Every single door was wide open. They hung on rusted hinges, gaping like empty mouths in the mist. Elias gripped his crowbar tightly, the cold metal biting through his gloves, and stepped into the nearest building. It was the foreman's quarters. The air inside was suffocatingly thick, smelling of mildew and that same sweet, metallic scent of copper and pine. The furniture was still there, a rusted stove, an overturned cot, and on the desk, Perfectly preserved beneath a thick layer of dust was a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Elias wiped the dirt from the cover and opened it. He expected to find records of timber yields, payrolls, equipment maintenance. Instead, the columns were labeled differently. November 2nd, harvested 400 board feet, 1 broken leg, Silas demands the root. November 6th, the soil is screaming. 3 men walked into the dark, did not return. Silas is pleased. November 10th, the sap is rising. It's in the water. It's in the walls. We are the harvest now. Elias flipped to the final page. There was no date, just a frantic, jagged scrawl that mirrored the note he had received in the mail. It read, "The church is the mouth. Do not go inside." Elias looked up from the ledger. Through the shattered window of the foreman's cabin, he could see it. Sitting at the very center of the semicircle, obscured by the heavy fog, was a structure much larger than the rest. It wasn't a traditional church. It didn't have a cross or a steeple. It looked like it had been grown rather than built. The walls were made of massive, unpeeled logs that twisted and contorted into each other as if the trees themselves had violently woven their branches together to form a dome. He knew he should turn back. Every survival instinct in his brain told him to run back to his car, drive down the mountain, and never speak of this place again. But the archivist in him, the man who dedicated his life to uncovering buried truths, took a step forward, then another. He walked toward the church. The ground beneath his boots felt soft, spongy. As he got closer to the structure, he realized why. The earth wasn't dirt. It was a massive, interwoven network of thick, pulsating black roots. They breached the surface, creeping up the sides of the church like veins. The heavy wooden doors of the church were sealed shut, not by a lock, but by a massive cascade of that dark, hardened sap. It had bled from the wood, fusing the doors to the frame. Elias raised his crowbar. He brought it down hard against the amber seal. Crack! The sound echoed through the silent camp like a gunshot. He hit it again and again. The hardened sap shattered into jagged glass-like shards, falling to the root-covered floor. Elias pushed the heavy doors open. They shrieked in protest. He shined his flashlight inside. The beam cut through the absolute darkness, illuminating the interior. There were rows of crude wooden benches, but they didn't face an altar. They faced a massive, hollowed-out tree trunk in the center of the room. The trunk was impossibly wide, at least 20 feet across, plunging deep into the earth like a bottomless well. Elias stepped inside. The air here was warmer. Too warm. He slowly walked down the center aisle, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He reached the edge of the massive hollowed-out trunk and shined his flashlight down into the abyss. The pit wasn't empty. It was filled to the brim with glowing liquid amber, and suspended inside the golden viscous fluid were the missing loggers, all 52 of them. They were perfectly preserved. Their eyes were wide open, staring up through the thick resin. But they weren't dead. As Elias watched in pure, paralyzing horror, the amber shifted, and down in the golden depths, one of the men slowly blinked. Then, from the darkness directly behind Elias, a voice whispered, "The tithe is paid."
Elias spun around, swinging the flashlight blindly into the dark. The beam cut through the dust-choked air and landed on a figure standing near the church doors. It was wearing the remains of a heavy flannel coat and suspenders, the uniform of a 1980s logging foreman. But there was no man left inside those clothes. The thing standing between Elias and the exit was a nightmare of anatomy and botany. Its skin was entirely gone, replaced by thick, twisting vines of black ivy that wove in and out of exposed, yellowing ribs. Where a human face should have been, there was only a hollowed-out stump of petrified wood, dripping with that dark, viscous sap. It didn't have vocal cords. When it spoke, the sound came from deep within its chest cavity, the horrifying noise of dry branches grinding together to mimic human speech. "The roots are thirsty, Elias," it grated. The voice was a chorus of a dozen different men, echoing from within the hollow wood. "Stay with us. Be part of the harvest." Elias didn't scream. Pure primal survival instinct took over. He raised the heavy iron crowbar and lunged. He swung with every ounce of strength he had, aiming right for the center of the creature's chest. Crunch! The iron sank deep into the rotten wood and woven vines. But the creature didn't even flinch. A thick spray of dark amber erupted from the wound, burning Elias's face like battery acid. He shouted in pain, dropping the flashlight as the creature's long, multi-jointed fingers, made entirely of jagged pine branches, lashed out, wrapping around his throat. The grip was cold and unyielding. Elias was lifted an inch off the ground, his boots kicking wildly. He could smell the overpowering stench of ancient decay and sweet resin. The creature pulled him closer to that featureless wooden face. But then, the church began to shake. Behind them, the massive pit of amber was bubbling. The surface of the golden liquid roiled and popped. Elias choked, fighting for air as he looked over the creature's shoulder. The 52 missing loggers suspended in the sap were waking up. They began to thrash, their mouths opened in silent, drowning screams as their bodies violently contorted against the thick resin. Hands clawed upward, faces pressed against the surface of the amber, their skin stretching and tearing as they fought to break free. The creature holding Elias turned its featureless head toward the pit. For a split second, its grip loosened. Elias didn't hesitate. He kicked his heavy boot straight into the creature's knee joint. With a loud snap of splintering wood, the leg gave way. Elias fell to the floor, gasping for air, and scrambled backward. He grabbed his fallen flashlight and sprinted for the church doors. "The sap is rising," the creature roared behind him, its voice now a deafening, unnatural shriek that shook the dust from the rafters. Elias hit the heavy wooden doors shoulder first. They burst open, sending him tumbling out into the freezing fog of Blackwood Ridge. But the forest outside had changed. The heavy, oily fog had turned a sickly shade of yellow, and the trees, the massive Douglas firs surrounding the camp, they were moving. Elias watched in sheer disbelief as the thick black roots he had walked over earlier began to writhe and pull themselves out of the frozen earth like massive blind worms. The entire ground was undulating. The forest was literally trying to swallow the camp. "Silas!" a voice cried out from the fog. Elias whipped his head around. From the open doorways of the rotting cabins, figures were stumbling out into the mist. They were covered head to toe in hardened amber, moving with stiff, jerky motions. The logging crew. They had breached the pit. They were coming for him. Elias ran. He didn't look back. He tore through the fog, leaping over the thrashing roots that tried to snare his ankles. His lungs burned with the freezing air, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could hear the heavy, uncoordinated footsteps of the amber-encased men behind him, their stiff joints popping and cracking with every step. He saw the faint reflection of his car parked near the thorny archway. It was his only chance.
He hit the unlock button on his keys, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside. He slammed the door shut and locked it just as a heavy, sap-hardened fist smashed against the driver's side window. Elias slammed his foot onto the gas pedal. The tires spun, screaming against the frozen gravel, kicking up dirt and ice. The amber-encased logger standing at his window raised a heavy, sap-hardened fist and brought it down against the glass. Crack! A spiderweb of fractures splintered across Elias's window. He didn't wait for a second strike. The tires finally found traction. The car lurched forward, violently throwing the creature off the side. Elias tore down the overgrown logging road, his headlights barely piercing the thick, sickly yellow fog. Behind him, the forest was alive. The massive roots tore through the earth, whipping through the air like blind tentacles, trying to wrap around his rear axle. He swerved to avoid a massive, bulging pine tree that seemed to lean directly into his path. The side of his car scraped against the bark, a sickening screech of metal that echoed into the night. But he didn't stop. He pushed the engine as hard as it would go. For 10 terrifying miles, Elias drove like a man possessed, his eyes locked on the twisting road, praying the tires wouldn't blow out on the jagged rocks. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the yellow fog broke. He burst through the thorny archway, the tires hitting smooth paved asphalt. The oppressive, suffocating weight of Blackwood Ridge lifted from his chest. The sky above him was clear, filled with the cold, indifferent stars of the Pacific Northwest. He had made it. He had actually made it out. Elias drove for another 3 hours until he reached a desolate 24-hour gas station on the outskirts of Seattle. He pulled under the flickering fluorescent lights, killed the engine, and just sat there. His hands were locked onto the steering wheel, trembling so violently he could barely pry his fingers loose. He forced himself out of the car. The cold night air felt incredibly sharp. He walked into the harsh, bright light of the gas station restroom to wash his face. He turned on the faucet, letting the freezing water run over his hands. He splashed his face once, twice. He grabbed a cheap paper towel, pressing it against his eyes, trying to erase the images burned into his retinas. The hollowed-out face of the foreman, the 52 men suspended in the golden pit, the writhing roots. But as Elias lowered the paper towel and looked at his reflection in the stained mirror, his heart stopped. He felt a sudden sharp pain deep in the center of his chest. It wasn't the pain of a heart attack. It felt like something was taking root. He coughed, a violent, hacking cough that rattled his ribs. He raised his hand to his mouth, and when he pulled his hand away, his palm wasn't covered in saliva or blood. It was covered in a thick, dark, golden sap. Elias stared at his hand in pure terror. He slowly looked back up at the mirror, and there, under the flickering fluorescent light, he saw it. The pupil of his left eye was beginning to dilate, and slowly, creeping across the white of his eye, was a viscous, amber-colored film. From deep within his own chest, a voice that was not his own whispered, "The tithe is paid." And that is why some places are better left forgotten. Sometimes the earth doesn't want us there, and sometimes it decides to keep us. If you made it this far into the dark with me, thank you. Stories like this rely on listeners like you. As I mentioned earlier, we are on a mission to hit our first 1,000 subscribers. If this story sent a chill down your spine, please hit that subscribe button right now. Leave a like to feed the algorithm and share this video with someone who shouldn't sleep tonight. Before you go, tell me in the comments, if you were Elias, would you have ever opened that tape, or would you have left it in the dark? Until next time, lock your doors, keep the lights on, and never, ever wander off the path. Good night.